So you love watching birds in your garden, right? But have you ever stopped to think if your yard is really helping them? Today we're going to dig into some pretty amazing research that shows how to turn your space into a real, life-sustaining sanctuary. And trust me, the answer is probably not what you're expecting. So, let's just get right to it with a pretty tough question. Is your garden a sanctuary? Or is it, maybe unintentionally, a trap? I mean, are we actually helping birds thrive, or could we be accidentally setting them up for failure? 50%. Just let that number sink in for a second. It's pretty staggering. According to a whole bunch of studies, that's the documented nest failure rate in a lot of our typical suburban landscapes. That means half of all nesting attempts are failing. We have to figure out why. And that brings us right to our first topic, what's being called the suburban nesting crisis. We're going to explore what's behind this failure rate, because, you can't find a solution until you really understand the problem. Okay, so here's the thing. The core issue isn't a lack of birds that are feeders. The real crisis hits during nesting season. You see, our yards might look all green and beautiful, but to a nesting parent bird, they're often total food deserts. They just don't have the right stuff needed to successfully raise their babies. So if our gardens are basically food deserts, what do we do? Well, it turns out the research points to one single, incredibly powerful rule. It's a rule that pretty much unlocks the entire secret to nesting success. This right here, this quote from a landmark study, it's a total game changer. Seriously. Researchers were tracking chickadees, and they found this incredibly clear, scientific line in the sand. When the landscape had more than 70% native plants, the birds thrived. But when it dropped below that number, their ability to raise a family, well, it pretty much vanished.
And look, that 70% mark, it's not just a suggestion. It's a tipping point. It's not some gentle slope. It's a cliff. You're either above it and things work, or you're below it and they don't. That's the absolute minimum you need to create a real working ecosystem for these birds.
See, this whole thing isn't just about having pretty plants. It's about the food web, what those plants actually support. And for something like 90% of songbirds, baby food means one thing, and one thing only: caterpillars. They're like the perfect little protein and fat-packed power bars for growing chicks.
9,000. Okay, just look at that number. It's huge, right? What in the world could that represent? Especially when we're talking about just one little family of birds trying to make it in your backyard. Get this. That is the number of caterpillars one single family of chickadees needs to raise their babies. 9,000. That is an unbelievable amount of food, and it's food that our typical ornamental plants from Asia or Europe just can't provide. Why? Because our local bugs, our caterpillars, never evolved to eat them. They're basically useless from a food web perspective. Okay, so the big question is, how do we create a yard that can actually produce that much life? Well, let's get into the practical side of things. Let's look at the blueprint for building your very own bird sanctuary, starting right from the ground up. All right, first thing to know, the best habitats are not flat like a lawn. They have layers, just like a real forest. You've got your tall canopy trees, a mid-level understory, a shrub layer, and then the ground cover. And these aren't just for looks. Each layer does a different job, nesting up high, hiding from predators in the middle, and a bustling cafeteria of bugs down below. You need this structure to get a real variety of birds to show up. And hey, if you want the biggest bang for your buck, this is it. These trees are absolute powerhouses. A native oak tree, just one tree, can support over 550 different kinds of caterpillars. Just think about that for a second. Planting just one of these keystone species has this huge ripple effect, building out that entire food web we've been talking about. And you can totally do this. It's all about having a simple plan. The real key is the timing. You do the heavy lifting, like tearing out invasive plants, in the late winter. That's before the birds get there to claim their spots. That way, you're not disturbing them. Then, as spring gets going, you start planting. And after that, it's just about watching quietly. Getting the timing right is absolutely crucial. Okay, so we've talked about what to do. Now, to make sure all that good work actually pays off, we need to talk about what not to do. It means we have to unlearn a few really common gardening habits that can accidentally sabotage the whole project. This, right here, is the essential mindset shift. For decades, we've all been taught that a tidy, perfect, golf course-looking yard is the goal. But you know what? Ecologically, a tidy yard is a sterile yard. The new goal isn't tidy, it's living. So that plant with a few holes chewed in the leaves, That's not a problem, that's a success story. It's a sign that you're literally feeding a baby bird. A messy yard is a healthy yard.
So it really turns out some of our most common habits are the most harmful. Number 1, raking up every single leaf. Number 2, spraying for bugs. And number 3, thinking a bird feeder is enough. Those are the big traps. A real bird sanctuary means leaving the leaves, learning to appreciate the insects, and putting the habitat first, above everything else.
So, finally, let's look at what success actually looks like. Because when you put all these pieces together, your yard really does transform into something more. It becomes a real, living, self-sustaining sanctuary. And the best part is, you don't have to guess if it's working. You'll see the proof. These are the real-time signs. First, you'll hear it. The air will just be filled with birdsong as they claim their territories. Then comes the magic part. You'll actually see the parents flying back and forth with beaks full of caterpillars to a hidden nest. And then, the ultimate payoff. You'll see the fledglings, the babies themselves out in the world. That's the proof. That's when you know your habitat is truly working.
And that really brings us to the bottom line, doesn't it? The choices you make this spring will answer this very question. You now have the knowledge, and you have the power to decide. Is your yard just going to be ornamental? Or is it going to be a vital, living part of conservation? Are you just growing plants? Or are you growing a future for the birds we all love?